everyone! Welcome to another episode of Unqualified Experts. I'm your host, Braden Gardner.
And I'm your local troublemaker, Shane the Corrupt Overlord.
And today, Shane actually brought me a rather interesting build for the Wizard, which is probably my favorite class in, well, not just 5th edition, but pretty much any tabletop RPG system that's really ever been printed. And it offers a fairly unique take that you don't necessarily get out of the other traditional wizard builds that you'll find in 5th edition D&D. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to him so that he can kind of outline the basic premise, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the pros and cons that it brings to the table and potentially your D&D group.
Hello, everyone. I know, a strange build, utterly shocking. You didn't see this coming, I'm sure.
Not at all.
So, so my first thought was, what would be the weirdest thing to expect out of a wizard, a level 1 wizard if you were a DM? My thought was, do somehow take a hit that was like a 20. And turns out you could do this. And I'm not even talking about going the battle wizard route?
War Mage.
War Mage route.
So you're shooting to kind of have an AC that's in around the 20 range at level 1 as a wizard.
Yep. The wizard that doesn't look, sound, or react like a wizard. And if you can confuse your party and have some fun at your DM's expense, all the better. And so I found a very interesting little thing, which is there is one race in the book that has armor proficiency as a racial feature as opposed to a class feature. So you might not know armor as a wizard, but you know what? If you're a mountain dwarf who prefers books to mines, you can start out with medium armor. And that's where this all started. So, kind of going with the fun of it, not your conventional wizard race. Yeah, especially when you're looking at +2 con or +2 strength, you're kind of thinking fighter, barbarian. And that's fair, but I think that medium armor proficiency is just a cool little curveball you can throw in there. Because that means regardless of which kind of, whether you go sorcerer, whether you go wizard, whether you go a different direction, you can actually wear armor from level 1. And for medium, I mean, you can always afford scale mail, which is a 14 plus 2 dex right off the bat. Depending on how your DM likes to run things, some of them like to say, hey, here's 1,000 gold, anything that's common magic item or below. You can up that to 15 for half plate, you can go with breastplate. It gives you some options. You can be, and I like the image of a dwarf with a breastplate, obviously a kilt because of my Scottish heritage. But he's a wizard, and that's going to throw off some people.
For sure, and a lot of us don't really pay attention to the variant race options in the player's handbook that you might find. And this actually brings some interesting new perspectives on the wizard that you aren't necessarily going to get even if you go with one of the more popular wizarding builds I've seen, which is the War Mage from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. For one, the War Mage, a lot of the War Mage's bag of tricks is contingent upon spending their reaction to boost their AC or boost their saving throws. Now, the Mountain Dwarf build here isn't going to necessarily boost your saves, but you're going to be able to have a more permanent buff to your AC, and more importantly, you're not spending your reaction and you're not limiting yourself to cantrips.
Yeah, and part of the interesting part of that is we had James who did a very, very over-the-top OP War Mage, but he'd say more than once, man, if you ever just throw a Dispel at me, I am screwed. You could throw a Dispel at my Mountain Dwarf Wizard at level 1, he's going to look at you funny, and then he's probably going to hit you with his axe. Because breastplate doesn't go away with Dispel magic. And you still have the ability to use that shield plus 5 AC reaction, which means conceivably, depending on your armor setup at level 1, he could roll a 20 and my AC could be 21 with reaction. And that is a tough thing to get around early on. This also does something really interesting to me. What is that one spell I've never failed to see a wizard grab early on?
Ooh. Mage armor.
Yeah. You don't need it. Why? Because you're wearing armor that the spell requires you not to be. So you already just freed up a spell slot. not just for having more things to cast in a day, but you simply don't need to know the spell period.
It's pretty convenient when
Yeah.
you have to spend your first level slots on shields if your DM decides that they're just going to keep trying to wail on you even though it's not going to work.
Yeah, you get that one extra chance to tell your DM where they can put it, and it lets you explore some other magic options, because I feel like sometimes, depending with the wizard or the party, it gets more interesting in later levels, because you're kind of pigeonholed to what you have to do early on. I mean, you have a D6 for hit points, you have to have mage armor. Except here, with a +2 con, you also get that hit point bonus right off the bat. And so especially, say, if your DM likes to roll your stats and you roll a really good markup, you could have a high intelligence and a high con and an AC. And that can let you do some pretty neat stuff, even overcoming the obvious die deficiency when you're getting the hit points. And for me, part of what I love is like, well, what would this mountain dwarf wizard actually look like in a campaign? Like, how would he be a wizard versus a barbarian? What led him down this path? And I think even kind of beyond the mechanics, it gets really interesting. And for me, because it has to be story, it has to be a troublemaker.
I'm
Once
shocked.
again, shocked. Thank you for coming in. I'm just imagining the DM bringing the party in. You're going through town. You're here, you have to meet someone. And suddenly you have a dwarf tossed out the window of the tavern you're supposed to meet in. And he gets up, and after possibly, depending on the group, a profanity-laced tirade meant to invoke as much laughing as possible in a thick and terrible Scottish brogue. Look at me, I'm so good at magic, blah, blah, blah. You weren't smart enough to dodge an axe to the chest, were you? You robe-wearing, haggis-spewing pansies? Needless to say, he's probably suspended from the School of Wizardry at that point. But
Probably.
you have just pulled out a bunch of really interesting things there. The wizard who clearly doesn't fit in because of his background. You don't get the idea that wizards are going to fit in too well with kind of the mountain dwarf setup either. And so there's, for me, because the role-playing is such a big thing, there are so many ways to play it. You can hide the fact you're a wizard from your party. I mean, you're a dwarf wearing a kilt with a breastplate and an axe. Depending on how you play it, you can easily, as long as you and your DM are kind of in on it, pass the note, send the text, hey, I'm casting shield. Since I'm on the front line, no one can see me. Maybe I'm using a spell like catapult, where I'm tossing some rocks up and it's a dwarven trick. Nope, you're using magic, and the party has to try to figure out what's going on, which I find kind of interesting. Are you the wizard who has the heart of a warrior? Or are you the warrior who is just having a hard time because you feel like you're just playing the part of a wizard, even though that's what you want to be as this character? And it's such a strong, especially early level character, where you can play it so many different ways with role-playing. And I think that just opens up the possibilities of what you can do with him. Is he a rogue? Is he a scamp? Is he too much student for the dwarfs? Too much dwarf for the college? And there's a lot of fun in those middle gray areas, I think, where you can create some story.
For sure. And not all the fun is going to be in the role-playing either. You're going to have a lot more fun putting together the overall statistics of your character sheet as well. Typically, whenever I or many people play a wizard, they have a tendency to really emphasize dex to kind of play up at having some form of armor class. And if you're wearing medium armor, you don't need to score higher than a 14 in there. That's literally all you need. So dex can become a tertiary concern, which is going to make you overall considerably more sturdy when you're backing up your intelligence with a solid constitution stat.
And that's nice, because you can get stats high enough for that, whether you're doing the roll, or even if you're doing the traditional point system, your highest points still go to intelligence. But, a 14 dex is all you need at that point. And so you're still getting the con bonus, so you're still getting a few more hit points. It's just a character who, at low level, can be... He might not be overwhelming, he might not be min-maxed in any way, but he could be surprisingly strong depending on how many points you have to spend or how you split them up. You also dodge the limp noodle arm wizard thing, since you do have that +2 strength. So even if that becomes your dump stat, you get a nice little boost to avoid the obvious wizard traps. Which with our DMs in our group is never a bad thing.
Oh yeah, especially since a smart DM is going to put you up against intelligent enemies that are going to be able to pick up on, the caster. Yeah. Get them first.
Which is less intimidating when you have a breastplate. Or for the DM, it can be fun too, because here's this dwarf coming up with an axe, and suddenly there's a flare of magic that maybe the enemies see, but the party doesn't. And that can lead to interesting dialogue, that can lead to natural confusion for the NPCs trying to figure out what's going on. And so it just, yeah, I really like this as a build, because it does some really interesting things. Some of the obvious pros, you can start out with a 16 AC this way, without having to use extra spells. And like we said, that jumps to 21 with shield when you get that reaction in there. Plus, you have a reaction because you're a wizard versus just a barbarian.
Definitely puts you on par with even some martial characters at first level.
Yeah. If you're playing it up as the trying to hide the magic thing, or trying to be the frontline dwarf even though you're a wizard, with a d6 hit point die, you're going to want that extra constitution. And you already start off with a little boost, which is going to be nice. If you add in a few more die into Constitution because you had good rolls, so you don't have to use them on other stats, and maybe take one of the hit point boosters for your feats if you play with the feat option, you can actually get a pretty impressive hit point by the mid-level. Other things I really like about that, the open spell slot. You don't need mage armor, you have no use for it. Dex, still important, not as much. A 14 is enough. You don't need the 16, you don't need the 18. You can just put that into con, which gives you hit points. So in a way, you kind of cheat the system a bit there, because it's almost like you get an extra little bump by playing the wizard this way. And for me, the unique character build and lots of different backstories, it's just such a cool thing. I also love the image of having that Happy Gilmore hockey stick putter moment where, well, you need to focus. What if you come to terms with being the dwarf wizard dwarf, and your battle axe becomes your special magic item later where you can focus and attack? It is just such a dwarf wizard thing. And yet you have probably never seen that in a campaign, and that's just the combination I love to see in a story. There are some obvious drawbacks. You're not going to min-max. Not as a wizard, not as a fighter. You're kind of in that weird middle zone, which, I don't know about you, that probably starts becoming more of an issue mid-level. I feel like in some ways you cheat on the lower levels, and that catches up to you as you get a little bit higher up in the ranks.
I would say that's true, particularly if you're trying to play up the fighter side of things, but if you have a good intelligence to work with, I don't really see that being a significant downside, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, it's one of those little things you might hit a gray area at some point. But then again, if you take your intelligence up to 20, it doesn't matter. You just have extra AC over another wizard who's wearing cloth. You do need either a good stat roll, or you may have, if you do the point buy system, you're going to have to survive some mediocre levels, and take the risk that, hey, if you're going to play the front line thing, at level 2 or 3, you might just get cut down, because you're not rolling the d10s like everyone thinks you are. So there's a chance. If you're okay with going out in style, as I like to put it, not a big deal, but there is that. And at least with our group, this isn't necessarily a con, so I like a good challenge, especially when it's story-based. The DM is probably not going to give you that natural camaraderie from being a dwarf, because you're going to play up the story of being a mountain dwarf, but you're the wizard who went away from the mines, who you're not going to be the warrior their barbarians and fighters are. You're not going to be worshipping the dwarven god as a cleric. So there's a very good chance you have that weird middle ground where the wizards will mess with you because they can, you don't fit in. The dwarves may mess with you a bit, and you might not get quite the bonuses you do in a story setting. But like I said, when the DM handles that well, that can actually be a bonus versus a con, at least in my book.
It adds a little extra flavor to the world, which is never going to be a bad thing. And it gives you another compelling reason to play this build over, say, a War Mage or an Eldritch Knight, both of which have a tendency to really min-max in different directions. Yep. Whereas this, I think that the balance is actually almost as if not stronger than the parts themselves.
Yeah, and it's kind of an interesting play, because the more I look at it, the more I really enjoy everything this brings to the table. It also brings up a really funny fact. Early on, because you have that reaction as a wizard, despite wearing the medium armor, you may be able to out-AC the cleric and the fighter early on. And if you're hiding the fact, if the DM is helping you hide the fact you're a wizard, so they have to figure it out, the confusion on their face for metagamers who know the game is going to be fantastic if they have no idea what's going on. So,
as someone who likes keeping secrets from the party, just because I think it makes things a little more interesting when not everybody knows everything that's going on, yeah, I could definitely see that being a major plus, as long as the player and the DM make sure that it is actually adding to the fun, not detracting from it. Because you can go too far with that, too.
And it is all about having the right reasons behind it, a good group to play with, and just doing it for the storyline. And so for that, I will say that this is kind of the way I like to encourage people to think creatively about builds, because with Mountain Dwarfs, I always used to think Barbarian, Fighter, Paladin, Cleric, the obvious ones. But you can make a really good case looking at this that is a unique and impressive wizard who can do some serious work at those lower levels. And, yeah, that is not something you can say too often, and he's going to avoid the obvious wizard traps that say, the battle wizard could, the war wizard could, because dispel doesn't matter. Yeah.
It's not a bad way to go. I mean, a typical enemy is not going to expect someone chucking a fireball to just deck them in the face when they come up from fisticuffs.
Yeah. And at that point, have fun with it. So, give your character a little bit of spark, give him something a little bit different. You can go the heavy Scottish. I also like throwing Australian accents on dwarves, which I believe we are getting to in the next video, because have fun. Throw something different, and thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. Let us know, have you ever done this weird out of left field build that nobody else thought of that you just loved? Whether it was story-based, whether it was just an interesting combination of powers, or whether it was just a nobody could figure out who you were, what you were doing. Story time. Go to the comments, let us know. We love seeing those types of stories. So, what's your favorite one? How many of you are convinced that, you know what? Maybe your party needs a Mountain Dwarf Wizard next campaign. And, let's see if you make the deck save to avoid getting thrown out the bar window to meet your party. I will not make that save, I'll tell you that right now.
I was going to say, we just talked about how we don't need the decks as much anymore, so I kind of expect a lot of our new Mountain Dwarf Wizard friends to end up outside in the street, which, you win some, you lose some.
But hey, at least as a Mountain Dwarf Wizard and a breastplate, you can take an axe to the chest, unlike those robe-wearing, haggis-spewing sissies.
Thanks for watching!
Thanks for watching, have a good one! If you like what you just saw, please support us by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more great gaming content.